On July 14, 1518, a woman named Frau Troffea stepped into a narrow street in Strasbourg and began to dance. She didn't stop for 6 days. By the time it was over, 400 people had joined her, and some of them were dead. Not from poison, not from disease, from something no physician could diagnose for 500 years, and no one could explain why. Her name, or at least the only name history preserved, is Frau Troffea. Witnesses describe her movements as involuntary, desperate, her face twisted not in joy but in agony. She dances through the day, through the night. Her husband begs her to stop. Neighbors gather, first amused, then horrified. By the third day, she cannot stand, but her legs keep moving. And she is only the first. The city records preserve fragments of suffering that statistics cannot convey. A tanner's wife danced for 6 consecutive days before collapsing with blood pooling in her shoes. A guild journeyman, young, strong, healthy the week before, was found dead in the horse market at dawn, his body still warm, his legs bent mid-step. A mother of 3 had to be physically restrained by her own children while her feet beat the cobblestones raw. Most people don't know this, but these weren't anonymous casualties in a medical report. They were people with families, with trades, with names the archives have since lost, reduced to entries in a council ledger that reads like a casualty list from a war no one could see. What killed them defied every explanation the city's physicians could offer, and the real answer wouldn't be understood for 500 years. Within days, 34 more people are dancing. But here's what makes this truly unsettling. They haven't been infected by a virus. They haven't eaten the same food. Many don't even know each other. One by one, they step into the streets, bodies seized by the same frenzied, unstoppable motion. The city authorities are watching, and what they decide to do next is one of the most catastrophically wrong medical decisions ever recorded. The chronicler Daniel Specklin recorded what happened next. Neighbors dragged Frau Troffea to a shrine outside the city walls, the chapel of St. Vitus in Hohenstein. They forced her into red shoes, placed her on a platform before the saint's altar, and prayed for divine mercy. It didn't work. When they brought her back, she was still dancing. And by then, the streets had changed. People who had laughed at her days before now crossed the street to avoid her. Mothers pulled children indoors. A blacksmith on the Rue du Marocain reportedly nailed his shutters closed after seeing a second woman begin to spin in the square below. The laughter was gone. Something else had taken its place. Now pause. Because what was happening inside these people's bodies has only recently been understood, and the answer is far stranger than poison or madness. In 2024, researchers published findings on episodes like Strasbourg that revealed something deeply unsettling about the human brain. Under the right conditions, conditions that existed in that city, in that summer, your body can turn against you in ways no one in 1518 could have imagined. But the city's physicians didn't know any of this. Their diagnosis was based on Galenic humoral theory, and the cure they prescribed would become one of the most spectacularly catastrophic medical decisions in recorded history. They didn't try to stop the dancing. They decided to accelerate it. The Strasbourg City Council consults its physicians. The diagnosis, hot blood. The prescribed cure, more dancing. So the council constructs a wooden stage in the horse market. They hire musicians from 2 guilds. They even pay strong men to prop up collapsing dancers so their feet keep moving. The city, the actual government, is now fueling the plague. And what happens next makes everything so far look like a warm-up. The dancing doesn't slow. It accelerates violently. By August, contemporary chronicles record approximately 400 citizens seized by the compulsion. 400 people dancing against their will in a 16th century city. And these aren't folklore tales. These are municipal records from the Strasbourg City Archives, government documents, council meeting minutes, physician reports. Paracelsus, one of the most famous medical minds of the 16th century, visits the region and writes about the event as genuine and lethal. This is documented fact. And then, people began to die. The chronicles describe strokes, heart failure, sheer exhaustion, bodies giving out while legs still twitch. The question that would haunt researchers for 500 years wasn't what killed them, it was what made them start. The question that should haunt you is why? Why did 400 people dance themselves toward death in the streets of a major European city? And why couldn't anyone stop it? Because every theory that would follow, for the next 5 centuries is almost certainly wrong. For decades, the most popular answer has been ergot, a fungus that grows on rye grain, producing compounds chemically similar to LSD, a hallucinogenic toxin triggering mass convulsions. Textbooks repeat it. Documentaries feature it. It sounds clean, scientific, case closed. But in 2008, historian John Waller published something that most scholars had never bothered to check. He'd spent years in the Strasbourg archives, cross-referencing the original council documents with medical evidence. And what he found doesn't just challenge the ergot theory, it obliterates it. Ergot poisoning restricts blood flow to the extremities. Your fingers go numb. Your toes turn black with gangrene. Coordinated, sustained dancing, for days, is physiologically impossible when your limbs are losing circulation. The Strasbourg dancers weren't convulsing randomly. Eyewitness accounts described recognizable dance movements performed for hours and days without stopping. Ergot cannot produce that. No known toxin can. The answer wasn't in their bread. It was somewhere far more dangerous, somewhere no one wanted to look. So maybe they were faking it. A mass protest. A performance. A cry for attention. Except, you don't dance until your heart stops for attention. You don't keep moving after your shoes have soaked through with blood as a performance. The municipal records describe authorities desperately trying to stop it once deaths mounted. They carried the afflicted to chapels. They confiscated instruments. They banned public dancing entirely. If this were theater, it would have ended when the audience stopped watching. It didn't end. It accelerated. And the reason why went unnoticed for 500 years. What Waller found buried in the Strasbourg archives wasn't just medical records. It was a portrait of a city disintegrating. Here's what historians overlooked for centuries, and it changes everything. Council minutes from the spring of 1518 describe emergency grain shipments that arrived rotten. Tax records show entire neighborhoods defaulting simultaneously. Parish registers record baptisms and burials in the same week for the same families. Children born into a world that was already killing them. A devastating famine had gripped the region. Smallpox was sweeping through the streets. Syphilis, still new and terrifying, was spreading unchecked. Poverty was crushing entire neighborhoods into dust. The people of Strasbourg weren't living. They were drowning, slowly, with no rescue in sight. Every morning brought another empty market stall, another door marked for the dead, another family begging in streets that offered nothing. A population primed to shatter. But suffering alone doesn't make 400 people dance themselves to death. They needed one more ingredient. A specific belief, ancient and absolute. The cult of Saint Vitus, deep in Alsatian folk belief, embedded for generations, was a terrifying conviction. An angered Saint Vitus could curse any person with an uncontrollable compulsion to dance. This wasn't abstract theology. This was visceral, daily terror. Dozens of votive paintings from the era survive, desperate offerings begging Saint Vitus not to inflict the curse. Shrine offerings. Pilgrimages. The people of this region didn't just believe the saint could make them dance. They believed it the way you believe gravity will kill you if you step off a cliff. And that level of belief is a weapon. The most terrifying precedent erupted in Aachen in 1374. Hundreds of people flooded the streets, dancing and screaming, many reporting visions of demons and saints that no one else could see. They formed processions that swept from town to town along the Rhine, pulling bystanders into the frenzy like a contagion with legs. Some threw themselves into rivers. Others begged priests to exorcise them. When it finally burned itself out weeks later, survivors described the experience identically. They knew what they were doing. They could see and hear everything around them, but they could not make their bodies stop. 144 years before Strasbourg, the mechanism was already perfected. And when you see where it appeared on the map, the last piece falls into place. So here's what actually killed those people in Strasbourg. Not a fungus, not a toxin, not a performance, a belief. Their own belief, planted so deep it hijacked their nervous systems until their bodies could not tell the difference between curse and reality. The more terrified they became of dancing, the more their overstressed bodies triggered exactly that response. Fear of the curse became the curse itself. And the city's response, building stages, hiring musicians, forcing them to keep moving, poured gasoline on a fire made of pure belief. It validated the curse. It proved to every terrified citizen that the plague was spreading, that it was real, and that they could be next. Each new dancer fed the terror that created the next one. Modern medicine has a name for this: the nocebo effect, the dark mirror of the placebo. When belief in harm causes the body to produce real, measurable, physical damage. Here's what happened inside those dancers' brains. Under extreme, sustained stress, the prefrontal cortex, the part of you that decides, that reasons, that says stop, goes offline. The amygdala floods the body with cortisol and adrenaline. The motor cortex activates on patterns learned from culture and expectation. Every peasant in Strasbourg had grown up watching shrine paintings of cursed dancers. They'd heard the stories since childhood. The movement pattern was already wired into their nervous systems, waiting. When their minds finally broke under months of famine and plague and terror, their bodies entered a dissociative trance. Conscious minds overwhelmed, bodies hijacked by the one outcome their culture taught them to expect. They could see everything around them. They could hear their families screaming for them to stop. But they could not make their bodies obey. Their minds became the executioner. And the nocebo didn't cause a headache. It stopped hearts. And here's why that should terrify you. Because the city made it worse. And here's the pattern that seals it. The 1518 outbreak wasn't unique. At least 7 major dancing plagues erupted across Europe between 1374 and 1518. The Rhineland, the Low Countries, Alsace. When you overlay these outbreaks against the regions where the cult of Saint Vitus was strongest, the correlation is almost perfect. Dancing plagues appeared exclusively where people believed a saint could curse them to dance. They never appeared where that belief was absent. Not once in 144 years. The plague followed the belief like a shadow follows the body that casts it. And now the truth becomes unavoidable. Before you dismiss this as a medieval curiosity, something that could only happen to superstitious peasants 5 centuries ago, consider this. Mass psychogenic illness hasn't disappeared. It has been documented in factories, schools, and military bases well into the 21st century. Conversion disorder, where psychological distress produces real, involuntary physical symptoms, is diagnosed in hospitals right now, today. The mechanism that killed people in Strasbourg is the same mechanism that makes your heart race when you believe a harmless spider is deadly. Belief reshapes the body. It always has. The only thing that changes is what we believe. And that raises a question you might not want to answer. On a July morning in 1518, Frau Troffea stepped into a narrow street and began to dance. She didn't choose to. Her body simply obeyed a story it had been told since birth. 400 people followed. Some never came back. And the most unsettling truth in those Strasbourg archives? That mechanism, the one that turned belief into death, it's still inside you. Right now? The only question, which story is it obeying?